Character file not found. Proceeding from channel profile. Dr. Kevin Adewale, men 45 plus. EN, health longevity. Dr. Archetype. You have probably seen the headline already. Hantavirus Cruise Ship Outbreak. And if you are anything like the patients in my practice, your reaction in the last 48 hours was one of two things: immediate alarm or immediate dismissal. Here we go again, or another virus the media is blowing out of proportion. Both of those reactions, I want to tell you right now, are going to leave you less prepared than you were before you clicked on this video. Because by the end of what I'm about to walk you through, you will understand exactly what hantavirus does inside the human body. You'll know how it actually moves from one place to another, what those mortality numbers really mean when you put them in context, and most importantly, what your actual personal risk level looks like right now. Not fear-mongering, not false reassurance, the science. And here is one thing I need you to hold on to for the next several minutes. Infectious disease specialists use a specific concept when they talk about what makes hantavirus uniquely dangerous compared to most pathogens you've heard of. I call it the invisible exposure problem. And once I explain that concept, and I will in about 4 minutes, everything you've been reading about this cruise ship outbreak will suddenly make a lot more sense. That concept is the piece most of the news coverage is leaving out completely. Stay with me. Let's establish the foundation first, because I find the vast majority of people are starting from almost zero accurate information on this particular virus. Hantavirus is not one virus. It is a family of approximately 20 different viral species. The name comes from the Hantan River in South Korea, where scientists first identified one of the founding strains in the 1970s. So we are not talking about a new pathogen that materialized from nowhere. This family of viruses has been studied for more than 50 years. Most people in the Western world first heard the word hantavirus in 1993. There was an outbreak in the American Southwest, the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico converge. It hit indigenous communities particularly hard. The fatality rate was alarming. The scientific community sat up and paid very serious attention. The reason most people outside of medicine never heard about it again after that is actually the most important single fact about this virus. But we will get to that. Here is the first practical piece of information I want you to apply. Not just to hantavirus, but to every health headline you see going forward. When an outbreak makes the news, the first question is not, how deadly is it? The first question is this a known pathogen or a novel one? Known pathogens have established behavior patterns, decades of data, clear transmission routes, understood exposure scenarios. Novel pathogens are the unknowns. COVID-19 was novel. That is what made it so dangerous in the early months. Nobody knew how it moved. Hantavirus is known. That distinction matters enormously. Write it down if you need to. Now, the way this virus actually travels from one place to another. This is where I see the most confusion right now, and I want to clear it up completely. People are assuming hantavirus spreads the way COVID spread, person to person, respiratory droplets, shared indoor air, being in the same room as an infected individual. For virtually every known strain of hantavirus, that is not the transmission route. Hantavirus is carried by specific rodent species, rats, mice, deer mice in North America. Different rodent species in Europe and Asia. The virus lives in their urine, their feces, and their saliva. Here is the mechanism that makes this virus dangerous. Those excretions dry out over time. They break down into microscopic particles that become suspended in the air of an enclosed space. And when a human being breathes in those particles, that is the moment of exposure. Think about what kind of situation creates that. You are cleaning out a garage that has been closed all winter. A cabin that hasn't been open in 6 months, an attic, a barn, a storage room, somewhere rodents have been living and leaving traces of that for weeks or months. You start moving boxes, you sweep, you open sealed doors, and invisible particles, too small to see, with no smell, no color, enter the air you are breathing. You walk away feeling completely fine. No warning, no immediate symptom, nothing. That is the invisible exposure problem. The danger has no sensory signal. You cannot detect it in the moment. The exposure has no immediate consequence you can feel, and that is why what you need is not generalized panic. It is specific situational awareness about particular high-risk environments. So here's the protocol. If you ever need to clean an enclosed space where rodents have been present, before you touch a single thing, open every window and door you can access. Wait at least 30 minutes. Put on an N95 rated mask. Mix a solution of 1 part household bleach to 10 parts water. Spray all surfaces before you wipe anything. Never dry sweep. Never use a vacuum without a HEPA filter in that kind of space. That protocol, applied correctly, removes the vast majority of your exposure risk. It is not complicated, but most people never think about it until it is relevant, and by then, the exposure has already happened. Let me give you a moment here. We have covered what hantavirus is, a known family of viruses, not novel, studied for decades. We have covered how it spreads, from rodent excretions in enclosed spaces, through particles you breathe in, not from other people. Now we need to talk about what it does when it enters the body. And this is where the numbers require some honesty. There are 2 major disease presentations caused by hantavirus. They attack the body through entirely different mechanisms. The first is called Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This is the version found primarily in North and South America. It begins like influenza: fever, muscle aches, fatigue, headache. The patient feels terrible, but assumes a common illness. They rest, they drink fluids, they wait for it to pass. Then, somewhere between 3 and 5 days after symptoms begin, something shifts. The lungs start to fill with fluid. The accumulation can be rapid. The patient begins struggling to breathe, and in severe cases, that struggle can become critical within hours. At this stage, without intensive medical intervention, supplemental oxygen, and when necessary, mechanical ventilation, the progression can be fatal. The case fatality rate for hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is approximately 38%. 1 in every 3 people who develop this presentation does not survive it. The second presentation is called hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. This is more prevalent in Europe and Asia. Here the virus targets the kidneys instead of the lungs. It causes internal bleeding, severe inflammation of kidney tissue, and in serious cases, complete acute kidney failure. Patients require dialysis to survive. The fatality rate reaches up to 50% in the most severe strains. I am not telling you these numbers to frighten you. I am telling you because you deserve accurate information. And accurate information is the only thing that allows you to make rational decisions. The critical question these numbers immediately raise is the one I want to address right now. How many people actually get infected? Because case fatality rate and incidence rate are 2 completely separate measurements. And understanding the difference between them is what separates rational health awareness from the kind of panic that makes people worse off, not better. Hantavirus infection is genuinely rare. Not rare for a pandemic scale virus rare. Clinically, documentably rare. The World Health Organization, as of this recording, assesses the global population risk from hantavirus as low. Here is why that matters. A virus can carry a 50% case fatality rate and still pose very low population level risk if the number of people who actually encounter the specific exposure scenario remains small. Hantavirus does not travel efficiently between humans. It does not circulate through airplane cabin air systems. It does not spread across a crowded indoor space from one infected person to another. The exposure requires a specific scenario: contact with contaminated rodent material in an enclosed space. And that is a genuinely narrow window. There is one exception worth knowing. The Andes virus, found in South America, has demonstrated limited human-to-human transmission in documented cases. Not efficient transmission, limited. Every other major strain requires that rodent exposure pathway. That is why we are not looking at a pandemic scenario. That is why experts are assessing this as categorically different from early 2020. Now, speaking of immune function, because this is directly relevant to men watching this at 45 and older, your baseline immune competence is not background noise. It is your primary defense against every serious pathogen you will encounter. And there are specific levers you can work on. Sleep. Minimum 7 hours per night, consistently. Not as a preference, as a medical requirement. Immune surveillance drops measurably with sleep restriction. Vitamin D. If you haven't had your levels tested recently, do it. Deficiency is common in men after 50, and it directly impairs immune response speed and quality. Ask your doctor for a 25-hydroxy vitamin D test. Visceral fat. The weight carried around the midsection, drives chronic low-grade inflammation that slows immune response to acute pathogens. This is not an aesthetic issue. It is a functional immune issue. And of course, if you have existing chronic conditions, kidney disease, hypertension, anything that affects your baseline organ function, discuss any changes to your health routine with your physician first. That is not a standard disclaimer. It is because your medical history genuinely changes the priority order here. I want to stop for a moment and ask you something. When you first saw the words Hantavirus Outbreak in the headline, what was your immediate reaction? One word or one sentence? Drop it in the comments below. Alarm, dismissal, curiosity, or something else entirely? I am genuinely asking. How a person processes health headlines tells me a lot about their health literacy baseline, and I want to know where this community actually stands. All right, we're entering the final stretch, and this is where I need to say something that some of you will not want to hear. A significant portion of people watching this video, and based on experience, it is not a small number, will walk away and apply this information incorrectly. Not because they didn't understand it, because they will hear, who assesses global risk as low, and conclude, not my problem. Nothing changes for me. And here is the danger in that logic. The people most likely to make the critical error are not the ones who are currently panicking. The panicking people are, ironically, alert. They are washing their hands, they are cautious, they are paying attention. The people that genuinely elevate individual risk are the ones who hear low global risk and disengage completely. If you work in agriculture, if you work in forestry or construction, especially in older structures, if you work in pest control, environmental field work, or wildlife management, your exposure context is different from someone in the city office. If you live in a rural area with known rodent activity in or near your home, your individual risk profile is not the same as someone in a high-rise apartment. If you have any enclosed space, a cabin, a barn, a basement, a storage unit, that hasn't been fully cleaned in over a year, and rodent activity is possible there, this entire conversation is directly relevant to you. Low global risk is a population-level assessment averaged across billions of people with enormously different exposure contexts. Your individual risk is determined by your individual situation. So here is a 3-step protocol for anyone in a higher exposure category. Step 1. Assess your environment now, not 6 weeks from now when this headline is faded. If you have any space with signs of rodent activity, droppings, nesting material, gnaw marks on materials, do not clean it without the full precaution protocol. For heavily contaminated spaces, professional remediation is worth the cost. Step 2. If you clean it yourself, the sequence is non-negotiable. Ventilate first, wait 30 minutes, N95 mask on, bleach solution ready, wet all surfaces before you wipe, never dry sweep. Step 3. And this is the most important piece of the entire video. Know the symptom pattern and know when to move immediately. If you develop fever, significant muscle aches, and progressive shortness of breath, within 1 to 8 weeks of any potential rodent exposure, go to an emergency room. Tell the physician specifically that you had potential contact with a rodent-contaminated space. That piece of information changes the diagnostic process entirely, and it can change the outcome. Do not wait. Do not assume it is influenza. With Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, the window for effective supportive intervention is measured in hours, not days. And now, the invisible exposure problem, fully explained. We talked about how the virus becomes airborne from dry rodent material, and how the moment of exposure is completely silent and undetectable. No smell, no symptom, no warning signal of any kind. But here is the second half of that invisibility. The part that makes early awareness so much more valuable than late panic. The incubation period for hantavirus ranges from 1 week to 8 weeks. 1 week to 8 weeks, between the moment of exposure and the first appearance of symptoms. During that entire window, nothing. The person feels entirely normal, goes to work, exercises, spends time with family, has no idea the virus is present and replicating. And then symptoms appear, often suddenly, and often already at an advanced stage. This is the feature of hantavirus that makes awareness matter more than any other response. Panic does not help you during a silent 8-week incubation window. Panic does not identify exposure. Panic does not recognize symptoms early enough to act on them. Awareness does. Knowing your exposure context, knowing the symptom pattern, knowing the decision point for emergency care. That is what changes outcomes with this particular virus. That is the piece the headlines are not giving you. Let me close with a clear summary of what you actually need to take from today. You do not need to cancel your travel plans. The cruise ship situation is under active investigation. Authorities are examining the rodent control protocols on board that vessel. The risk to any individual passenger, based on current evidence, is extremely low. You do not need to change your daily routine or wear a mask in normal indoor spaces. Hantavirus does not spread through ordinary human contact. What you do need is this specific situational awareness. The cleaning protocol for enclosed spaces with rodent history. The symptom pattern. The timing of the incubation window. The decision point for seeking emergency care, and the specific thing you tell the physician when you get there. And if you fall into one of those higher exposure categories, act on that information now, while it is front of mind, not in 6 weeks. One final question before you go, and I want real answers. Do you have an enclosed space in your life right now? A cabin, a storage unit, a garage, a basement that you have not fully assessed for rodent activity? Has today changed whether you are going to check that? Tell me in the comments. I suspect far more people are in that situation than realize it. If this gave you real information instead of just a feeling, share it with someone who has been forwarding you the panic headlines. They need context right now more than they need fear. And subscribe if you haven't already, because next week I'm going to break down exactly how the immune system responds to serious viral pathogens and what men over 45 can specifically do to optimize that response. Given everything we covered today, that video is going to be directly useful to you. Link is in the description. Stay informed, stay rational, take your health seriously, and never let fear be the one making your decisions.